My father was born in Poland. He was an infant. He had two older sisters who were born in Poland. There was no Poland at that time. It was divided between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. We were from the part that Germany owned. There was signs that there was going to be a war. World War I started in 1914. My grandfather left mostly because of that. He was a skilled tradesman. He was a blacksmith. And he got a higher paying job in the mills because of that. And he came from Poland. He ended up having 4 boys and 4 girls in my father's family. My mother's family was the same, 4 boys and 4 girls. They came from Italy. They both came, I think, in the same year, in 1910. The market crashed in 1929. And you can't tell exactly what caused the depression. Okay, well, economically, it was the Great Depression. And that's why he left. There was really no work. He went to Chicago in the late 20s. His father wanted to keep him out of the steel mills. There was a huge Polish-American people in Chicago, a lot of that. So he went there and he worked he was in the radio shop there. And that was a big growth industry at that time. Radios were just started in the 20s. Lots and lots of radio manufacturers. But then when the Depression came, he lost his job in Chicago. So he came back to live with his parents. Socially, most of the immigrants that came to work in the mills and the mines were Eastern and Southern European, heavily Catholic. There were a lot of Catholic came with the Irish famine, so I think the country was starting to think it was going a little bit too far that way. And there was some prejudice naturally. Right during that time, the presidential election in 1928 was really covered with that. Al Smith was the Democratic nominee. The first time a Catholic had ever got a nomination of a major party. And that was a major issue, even underground a lot in that time. Because things worked out well for everybody. It's almost natural, and I don't complain, but I just saw a lot of it. Because I grew up in an Italian house, so my dad came back from Chicago. And there wasn't any work. He was 22 at that time. And I just think rather than sit around, there were a lot of bars in these steel towns, you could have done that easily. He happened to live about a block from the railroad tracks, and that could have just got to him. And he and a friend left. And the friend was a great traveling companion. He was one of these people, if you bring up his name, everybody, God, he was a singer and a storyteller. And his friend, they got to Florida. Dad was determined to go. He sent postcards from all the states, so I don't have any of those, but he did send a couple letters that my mother ended up getting. He sent a letter from Richmond saying, you can bet your pants I'm not coming back till I make all 48 states. So he was determined to do it. His friend left. I think that was a 16th state, probably Florida. And he continued on his own the rest of the way. Left with 48 cents, which I think was symbolic, 48 states, a penny a state. He actually traveled 13,776 miles. The friend that told the newspaper 15,000 miles, they were keeping track. My father would send cards home, and some of his friends were keeping his mileage, and my father kept his also. In the back of his journal, he had segment by segment the number of miles he went. So they both, because he mailed the first, they're in 2 journals. He mailed the first one home from South Dakota. It is a goal also, he said, I'm going to make 48 states plus Canada. And he didn't go to Canada, but he did go to Mexico. So he made it international. He was in El Paso over across the river. He probably was going to go to Canada when he was in Washington State or something like that. The hobo culture really peaked probably in the 20s. There were thousands and thousands. And again, this goes back to this social issue a little bit. There was sort of a divide. They were mostly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men. And I think part of that element didn't want those kids going around they figured they were wasting their lives And there were vagrancy laws in the early 20s. I mean, the economy was so good that you couldn't be without a job. That's why the immigrants came. They needed workers for the mills and the mines. So I said, it really reached its peak probably in the early 1920s. A lot of them were arrested. I mean, it was really illegal. And in my dad's journal, he talked about seeing some arrested. When he went, he was part of the culture yet, but there were a lot like him who just went because there were no jobs. Some went really looking for work, traveling around the country, knowing there was nothing where they were. He noted families. There were a lot of families that traveled that were probably evicted. Women, and I saw something that said you'd be surprised by the number of women traveling. They adopted a code of conduct in 1895. They had a convention in Chicago. And it's very nice, it's all be respectful, don't use anybody, be nice to people. What goes around comes around type of thing. There's going to be somebody following you, so don't upset the people in the town, make it good for you, people coming behind you. He slept outside. There's a lot of things society change will be a lot more difficult to do. There was no violence. Once he talked about there was rumors there was going to be violence, so a bunch of the guys got sticks and everything. During the Depression was a good time in a way because everybody were in this together. So they were out to help anybody they could. An interesting aspect, and I mentioned this in the book, how a lot of the very poor people stepped up and gave him something. These were people living in boxcars. These were black people in the South. He would send the kids would go home and come back with food for him. He slept in jails, several. Again, it'd be all in this together type of thing. A lot of the local sheriffs would just let the people stay there, and they'd often give them dinner or breakfast the next day. In fact, he was in jail in Thanksgiving, and people brought turkeys in for the sheriff, so he ate pretty well. They sort of fed him. Some of the places in the bigger towns, they would have jails that reserve certain spots for people like him on the road. They would put their local people they had to arrest in part of it, but they would put people on the road in another part. Salvation Army was a big factor back then. He slept in 13 Salvation Armies. And what's interesting, you see in the Salvation Army, the missions he stayed in, they usually asked to do some work. There was this concept back then, you have to earn everything, there's nothing given. So he peeled potatoes in the Salvation Army, cleaned, dusted up, but they usually made him do something like that. He came home the end of December 32. He had a letter saying he was going to stay until 33, but I think his trip he was stuck in the cold weather up north, and it may be for Christmas he wanted to get home. But that was still 32, and the economy didn't really. It increased for a while. Then there was another sort of a recession in like 37. So it didn't really work until the very late 30s. Well, if anybody can learn anything, I think the thing is, only live once. And if you feel like doing something, you never get another chance at it. So he did it. You'd rather not leave with too many regrets.